There's a moment almost everyone has experienced. When you're misunderstood, judged unfairly, or criticized, your first instinct is to immediately explain. You try to be clearer, more detailed, more logical, just to make others see you correctly. But what you may not realize is that, in that very moment, you've unintentionally placed yourself in a lower position. Constantly explaining yourself doesn't make you more convincing the way you think it does. In fact, it often creates the impression that you're seeking approval, as if you need others to validate your worth. This dynamic is subtle. No one says it out loud, but people can feel it. The truth is, not everyone listens to understand you. Some people are simply waiting for you to finish so they can hold on to their original opinion. And the more you try to explain yourself in those situations, the more uncertain you appear. This isn't about whether you're right or wrong. It's about how you present yourself. Sometimes, choosing to stay quiet, maintaining your composure, and not rushing to explain is the strongest signal that you truly understand your own value. When someone misunderstands you, an uncomfortable feeling quickly rises. You want to correct it immediately. You want them to see your true intentions, to understand that you're not who they think you are. So you start explaining, adding more details, clarifying every point, hoping everything will be set right again. But this is exactly where the trap begins. The instinct to be understood makes you believe that if you just explain clearly enough, logically enough, people will change their perception. In reality, it doesn't work that way. Once someone has formed an opinion about you, they tend to filter everything through that existing belief, which means no matter how much you explain, they may still hold on to their original view, and in the process, you slowly lose your sense of groundedness. You're no longer speaking because you want to, but because you need them to understand. That difference is significant. It shifts you from being self-directed to seeking approval. Understanding this doesn't make you cold or distant. It simply helps you realize that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected immediately. Your reflex to explain yourself didn't appear randomly. It was formed early in life. As a child, whenever you were blamed, criticized, or misunderstood, you almost always had to explain. You gave reasons, retold what happened, and tried to prove that you didn't have bad intentions. And in many cases, it worked. Explaining helped you avoid punishment or be treated more fairly. Over time, your brain registered this as a safe strategy. When conflict arises, explain to protect yourself. The problem is, that strategy doesn't always fit anymore once you grow up. In the adult world, not everyone plays the role of a fair, responsible listener. Many people aren't searching for truth. They're protecting their own perspective. But you're still carrying that old reflex, still believing that if you explain clearly enough, things will resolve. This mismatch is what leads you to over-explain without even realizing it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be understood. But if you don't recognize where this pattern comes from, you'll keep repeating it, even in situations where it no longer serves you. When you constantly explain yourself, you're not just communicating information, you're signaling your position. You may believe you're simply clarifying things, but others often perceive it as you trying to gain acceptance. And that difference matters. Every time you over-explain, you unintentionally place the other person in the role of the judge, while you take on the role of the one who has to prove something. This creates an imbalance. They become the one who decides whether you're reasonable, while you're the one trying to convince them. Over time, this can make you appear less certain, even when you're actually right. It becomes even more noticeable when you repeat yourself, add unnecessary details, or try to make your explanation complete. Instead of strengthening your message, it often weakens it. Rather than sounding clear, you come across as worried about being misunderstood. People with strong self-worth don't need to over-justify themselves. They speak enough, speak clearly, and then stop. They don't try to control how others perceive them because they're already grounded in how they see themselves. Sometimes, knowing when to stop speaking is exactly how you preserve your value. A difficult truth to accept is this: not everyone wants to understand you, no matter how clearly you explain. In many situations, people don't listen to understand. They listen to respond, to defend their perspective, or to protect their ego. At that point, The conversation is no longer about finding the truth. It becomes a quiet battle of holding ground. When you keep explaining in these situations, you step into a loop with no real end. You add more to clarify, they push back with a different angle. You go deeper, they find new reasons to disagree. And slowly, you become exhausted. Not because you're wrong, but because you're trying to achieve something the other person was never aiming for in the first place. The danger is in the misunderstanding you create for yourself. You start to believe that if you could just explain a little better, it would finally click. But the issue isn't how well you're speaking, it's whether the other person is willing to truly listen. Recognizing this doesn't make you cynical. It makes you selective. You begin to protect your energy and choose the right moments and the right people to speak to instead of trying to convince those who were never open to understanding you. Silence is not weakness, though many people misunderstand it that way. We're often conditioned to believe that if we don't respond immediately or explain ourselves, it means we're losing or being overpowered. But in reality, knowing when to stay silent is a powerful form of control. When you don't rush to explain, you maintain your composure. You're not pulled into someone else's emotional pace and you don't react under pressure. That alone sends a clear signal. You're not dependent on external validation. Silence also gives you space to observe. You can see more clearly what the other person's intention really is, whether they're trying to understand or simply trying to impose their perspective. When you don't rush to speak, you gain time to choose your response instead of reacting out of instinct. More importantly, silence preserves the value of your words. When you don't overtalk, what you say carries more weight. People are more likely to pay attention rather than tuning out a long stream of explanations. This doesn't mean you should always stay silent, but when you know when to pause, you begin to control how you show up in front of others. One of the main reasons you fall into over-explaining is the belief that your words can change how people see you. But in reality, words only carry weight for a short time. What truly shapes your image is what you consistently do over time. You can say that you're responsible, committed, or trustworthy. But if your actions don't reflect that in a consistent way, your words lose their meaning. On the other hand, when you repeatedly demonstrate your values through how you work, how you respond, and how you keep your word, you no longer need to explain. People can see it for themselves. Relying on explanations puts you in a position where you feel like you have to talk people into believing you. But actions shift that dynamic completely. You're no longer trying to convince. You're simply showing. This doesn't mean you should stop speaking altogether. It means you understand that words are meant to support, not replace what you do. When your actions are clear and consistent, your words become shorter but far more powerful. In the end, people rarely remember everything you said, but they always remember how you showed up. Silence isn't always the right choice, and speaking up isn't always necessary either. What truly matters is your ability to distinguish whether a conversation is worth your energy. You should explain yourself when the other person genuinely wants to understand. You can recognize this through how they listen, the questions they ask, and their willingness to consider your perspective. In those moments, your words have value because they're being received, not distorted. But when you notice that someone is only arguing, protecting their ego, or has no real intention of reconsidering their view, continuing to explain will only drain you. In those situations, silence isn't avoidance. It's a deliberate decision. Maturity isn't about always having the right response. It's about knowing when a response isn't necessary at all. You stop reacting impulsively to every emotional trigger and start choosing your responses based on your values and long-term intentions. When you reach that point, you don't just conserve your energy, you preserve your self-respect. And often, that quiet confidence earns respect from others as well. At the end of the day, what matters most isn't whether you explained yourself well enough, it's whether you truly understand your own value. When you're grounded within yourself, you no longer feel the need to make everyone understand you, agree with you, or validate you. Trying to prove yourself to everyone is a game with no finish line. There will always be people who misunderstand you, judge you through their own lens, or simply don't care about the full truth. If you try to correct all of that, you'll only drain your time and energy. Instead, you begin to be selective. You choose who is worth explaining yourself to. You choose conversations that actually matter. And you accept that not every misunderstanding needs to be resolved. This selectiveness doesn't make you distant. It makes you clear. When you stop trying to prove yourself, you feel lighter. You're no longer pulled into unnecessary arguments or endless explanations. And that quiet sense of certainty often earns more respect than any explanation ever could.